The youngest franchise in the NFL today is the Houston Texans. This is an organization, an expansion franchise that only came into being in 2002. And as a result, there's some slim pickings when it comes to choosing the five greatest Houston Texans of all time. Let's be perfectly realistic. I talked about it in a previous video that it was going to be one guy, clearly number one, and then trying to figure out who was two, three, four, five would be maybe just a little bit more challenging, but maybe not so much. In their 12 years of existence, they've made the playoffs twice. You know, they haven't been the worst organization in the NFL during that time, no way, shape, or form, but they really haven't done a whole lot, frankly. And you look at some of the honorable mentions in terms of players that got left off the list that have contributed at different times and been stars for them. I look at guys like, you remember Dominic Williams, and you remember guys like Steve Slayton. You look at guys like Dwayne Brown and D'Amico Ryans and Brian Cushing. These are some notable names that stand out to me from a Houston Texans standpoint. Like I said, again, the pickings are very slim. So let's get right down to it. My list of the five greatest Houston Texans of all time. Number five, and only number five, again, to me, I think kind of validating the fact that that pick was a mistake in 2006, was their number one overall selection out of North Carolina State, Mario Williams. Now, some people will sit there and say that, he wasn't that bad. He wasn't a bust. And no, he wasn't a bust. And during his 6 seasons in Houston, he had his moments of brilliance. He had his moments of showing some greatness. He was a two-time Pro Bowler. He finished with 53 sacks over the course of his 6 seasons as a Houston Texan. But let's be perfectly realistic. He's not even the best defensive player in the history of the organization. I just think back on Mario Williams' time with the Houston Texans, and I'm like, what did he really contribute? And you look at 2011 when they actually finally made the playoffs, and Mario Williams missed the majority of the season. Do the Houston Texans really miss Mario Williams all that much? Not particularly. Is he still one of the five best Houston Texans players in the history of the organization? Yes, because there was a few years that other than maybe one guy, he was the only other guy that was really worth watching on that Texans franchise. Number four, a player that got a lot of shit, some of it justified and some of it not, is Matt Schaub, who they acquired via trade from the Atlanta Falcons in 2007. During his 7 years in Houston, he had some injury-riddled seasons, but he also had some good seasons too. A two-time Pro Bowler. He had 3 seasons where he went over 4,000 passing yards. He actually led the league once in completions and attempts and passing yards. You look at Matt Schaub, he was one of those kind of solid guys. Borderline franchise quarterback, not a true franchise quarterback, in part because I think of his inability to consistently stay healthy for a 16-game season. But he was a good quarterback, easily the best quarterback the Houston Texans have ever had up to this point. And again, I think got a lot of crap in 2013, some of it deserved, and frankly, some of it not. The team went 2-14 for a reason, and it wasn't just because of crappy quarterback play from Matt Schaub and others. And that's the bottom line. And I wonder if Houston Texans fans are going to miss Matt Schaub in 2014, and if he'll at some point in time actually get some of the respect he deserves for some of the good years he had with the organization. Number three, the 11th overall selection out of Wisconsin in the 2011 NFL Draft, J.J. Watt. When you talk about J.J. Watt, you say, well, he's only been with the organization for 3 seasons, but yes, you look at what he's done in those 3 seasons, and he has been dominant. The premier defensive lineman in the National Football League, and I don't think anybody questions that. Easily the prototype of what you would want a 3-4 defensive end to look like. It would be J.J. Watt. In his 3 seasons, he's made the Pro Bowl twice. He's a two-time first-team All-Pro, which I think is more important and much more significant. He was a 2012 NFL Defensive Player of the Year, and based off of certain measurables, you could argue that in terms of overall defensive play at his position, that he was even better in 2013. I think when all is said and done, there is a very distinct possibility that J.J. Watt could end up being the greatest Houston Texan of all time, and he's already number 3 on the list. Number 2 is an undrafted player out of Tennessee who's gone on to be the second best offensive player in the history of the organization. That is Arian Foster. During his 5 seasons in Houston, he's been a 3-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time first-team All-Pro. He's a 2-time league leader in rushing touchdowns, a 1-time league leader in rushing yards. It'll be interesting to see in 2014 and beyond what an Arian Foster does in Bill O'Brien's system as opposed to the Gary Kubiak system, which is, needless to say, a branch off of the Mike Shanahan system with that zone blocking scheme that seems to be very beneficial to running backs. But there is no question that when you play the Houston Texans, one of those players that you always have to game plan for and you always have to deal with and be concerned about is Arian Foster. And I think based off of his accomplishments and his achievements, he is number 2 on the list. But as I mentioned before, the number 1 player in Houston Texans history is clearly Andre Johnson, and it's not even close. I just propose this to Texans fans. Imagine how differently things would be, and imagine how different your organization's history would be if the Detroit Lions wouldn't have taken Charles Rogers number 2 in 2003 and taken Andre Johnson like they should have, who was clearly the better NFL prospect to anybody, I think, at the time that watched or had a brain. They could see Andre Johnson was going to be the man, not Charles Rogers. But the Detroit Lions didn't take him. The Houston Texans did with the 3rd overall pick, with him coming out of the U. And in Andre Johnson's 11 seasons in Houston, he's been a 7-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time first-team All-Pro. He's had 5 seasons of 100-plus receptions. He's had 7 seasons with over 1,000 yards receiving. 3 of those 7 seasons have been over 1,500 yards, a 2-time league leader in receptions and receiving yards. He has been the team's leading receiver 10 total times out of his 11 seasons with the Houston Texans. Beyond question to me, the greatest Houston Texan of all time. And when you look at Andre Johnson, some people will look at his numbers and say they're very good, but are they truly great? I think based off of the circumstances and the situation that he was a part of for so many years where he was the primary passing weapon, he didn't have that great Pro Bowl, All-Pro type of quarterback to consistently get him the ball throughout his 11th season. I think no question about it that Andre Johnson is a Hall of Famer, will be a Hall of Famer, will be the first Hall of Famer in the history of the Houston Texans franchise, and will always be remembered as that first truly great Houston Texan. And that's the way it is. So let me know what you think of my list. Next up will be the Indianapolis Colts, which will be a tough list to do because between their time in Baltimore and Indianapolis, they've had a lot of great players throughout the history of that organization.